Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Right, this programme has been told that the rollout of universal credit could leave up to 1 million working people at risk of benefit sanctions once it's fully rolled out. A benefit sanction is a penalty imposed on a claimant when they don't meet certain conditions, like going to a job centre appointment. Each year, around 350,000 people are sanctioned, which could include a significant cut in their benefits or those benefits being stopped altogether for a period of time. Those sanctions used to only apply to people who were looking for work. But now, for the first time under universal credit, people who are already working could still be sanctioned. Our reporter John Owen has been to meet a man who was financially penalised for attending a funeral. We brought you the full film earlier. Here's a short extract.
Conditionality, or the requirement for claimants to do certain things like look for work or attend meetings at the job centre in order to continue receiving benefits, has been a feature of the welfare system for years. Those who fail to meet their obligations risk being sanctioned and could face a partial reduction in benefit payments or even their benefits being stopped altogether.
The government says that the number of people being sanctioned each year is falling. But the welfare system is currently undergoing the biggest shake-up for a generation, as every month thousands of claimants move from legacy benefits like job seekers allowance and onto the new universal credit system, which merges 6 benefits into a single monthly payment.
With that shift will come a sharp increase in the number of claimants who will be exposed to the risk of being sanctioned.
That's because universal credit means that people in low-paid work, as well as those who are out of work, will face the possibility of losing their benefits if they fail to meet obligations set out by the government.
Gareth Forrest, a former employee of the Department of Work and Pensions, lives in Preston with his partner. In recent weeks, he's received heavy sanctions and may now be facing eviction as a result of falling behind with the rent.
You're waking up in the morning thinking, is this the final day when you're going to be told to leave? Waiting for information from the benefits to see if they are going to reinstate the payments and reduce the sanctioning. Until you know that information, then you're going to be worrying each day. And it's not just a case of each day, it's each hour, each minute.
As a universal credit claimant, he also has experience of being sanctioned whilst in work as a result of not looking for more hours.
There have been deductions where you'll tell them that you're working so many hours and they're telling you to find more.
Gareth says that one of his more recent sanctions resulted from attending a funeral instead of going to a meeting at the job centre.
I even had a phone call from the job centre on the day of the funeral. They were saying that, are you sure you're at the funeral? Are you not lying?
David Webster is a leading authority on the welfare system, and he's concerned that the use of sanctions amounts to a form of what he calls extrajudicial punishment and a parallel legal system operating without the safeguards found in the courts.
It's a full-blown penal system, a system of punishment for supposed offences.
David explained that universal credit currently has a higher rate of sanctioning than its predecessors, and that once it's completely rolled out, more people than ever will be vulnerable to being sanctioned.
I don't think people have realised quite how drastic this system is and what an extraordinary extension of the control of the state over individuals' lives it is, and what an extraordinary attack it is on the rights of the citizen.
So why do policymakers want to maintain and expand conditionality? Matthew Oakley led an independent review of job seekers' allowance sanctions that reported to Parliament in 2014.
Ultimately, people in low-paid work who are able to work for longer hours, they're still claiming benefits, and they could very well move off benefits by increasing their hours. So I think it's right that we require them to do so.
Right, well, the former Work and Pension Secretary, David Gork, told Andrew Marr just before Christmas that sanctions are appropriate in some cases where benefit conditions are not being met. He said the amount of sanctions, the number of sanctions that have been imposed, had fallen last year compared to previous years.
We've seen fewer sanctions over 2017 than we did in 2016 and 2015, so the number of sanctions are coming down.
But if you say I've got it wrong, let me just read you this. This is the Public Accounts Committee in February. Sanctions have increased in severity in recent years and can have serious consequences such as debt, rent arrears and homelessness. Are they wrong?
It is the case that in the last couple of years, the number of sanctions have fallen. Let's also remember that we have a welfare system that is based on conditionality, and rightly so. We pay money to people, but there are certain conditions that are in place. We do expect people to comply with those conditions. In some cases, where those conditions are not met, it is appropriate to have a sanction. If you don't have sanctions, essentially you don't have conditionality and you don't change behaviour.
Let's talk now to David Finch. He's from the Resolution Foundation. They've been analysing how universal credit might affect living standards in the UK as it's rolled out. And Matthew Oakley is the director of WPI Economics. They look at how governments can improve policies. And he believes the principle of sanctions on universal credit is fair. Welcome both of you. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. David Finch, your reaction first of all to the fact that over 1 million people in work could still face being sanctioned?
Well, I think there are really two sides to this, and I think it's balancing that the potential risk of sanctioning, but also the support that can bring to low-paid people. So in the UK, we have got a big low-pay problem in the labour market. A fifth of all workers are in low pay, and of those, around 3/4 are still in low pay 10 years later. So actually, it's a good thing that the government are looking to provide some form of support to people who are in work. We do think it is up to around 1 million people who will be brought into this new conditionality regime. But then there are really questions around just making sure they get that balance of support right, and you don't end up with a kind of unfair system. OK,
it doesn't sound like you're that worried then. Would that be fair?
Well, I think there's reason to be positive that you're going to extend this support, and the government are recognising it's an issue. The risks really come from the fact that nowhere in the world really does this at the moment, and it's going to be really hard to get the process right. It's kind of taken 2 decades to get to a stage where we have a relatively kind of efficient system for unemployed people and help them move into work. And so to get that right for people in work who actually have much trickier lives because they're in work, you've got to balance the support around what they're actually doing. I think that's going to be really tough. And in some ways, there is actually credit for the government because they are going to test an approach for the next year or so and try and get that support right. I think we just would like them to be a bit more ambitious and try and really help people progress onto higher levels of pay.
Matthew, how do you think imposing these kind of conditions, if you do, helps people into further paid work and increase their salaries?
What we've seen from evidence of people who are out of work is that conditions placed on benefits actually improves the speed with which they move from benefits and into work. Now, the point here is that the new benefit, universal credit, will provide support to people who might be working 3 or 4 hours a week. That's a completely new thing. Previously, the government would have required people to work 16 or 30 hours a week to get in-work benefits. By reducing that down, you give more support to more people, but it's right to kind of require them to do more to try and find better work. And as I was just saying, actually providing support to help people move into higher paid, better paid, longer hours jobs can really improve the situation. So this is not just about saying, okay, you're not in a high paid job, we're going to sanction you. This is about saying, you're not working many hours, actually you're more than capable of working more hours, getting a better paid job. We'll give you support to do that, but in return, we expect you to look for it. That to me sounds fair and I think effective.
You make it sound really simple. It's easy to get more hours, to get more pay.
Not at all, not at all. I mean, I think the clear thing here is that this isn't going to be a penalty for people who don't find more hours or more pay. This is simply saying, you're on low paid work, you're working relatively few hours, we want to give you, the government wants to give you support to increase your hours, increase your pay. That's, to my mind, a good thing. If people don't take on that support, I think it's right that there is a penalty for doing so.
DWP say to us, we're committed to helping people improve their lives, and universal credit is helping people into work faster and for the first time helping them earn more in work. Sanctions are only used when someone has failed to meet the requirements without good reason. This is in a small minority of cases, and people are given every opportunity to explain why they've failed to do so before a decision is made. We've seen from our examples today, I mean, one gentleman was going to a funeral, gave them the order of service after he had been to the funeral, and yet he was still sanctioned.
I mean, that's obviously completely wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, if you speak to benefit claimants, the thing that annoys them most is when they've been doing the right thing and actually they're then penalised for doing that. Clearly that has gone wrong in that situation. But I think what we need to look at is the broader principle here, not just at isolated cases where things go wrong. The broader principle that people working low hours or out of work get support and should be doing something in return for that support, I think is a strong one.
Are women penalised most by this system?
I think they're not necessarily penalised most, but Universal Credit is bringing in some kind of extra conditionality, and that is likely to overly affect women more than men. So the big thing that's happening are people in...
Because they do part-time work and lower paid
exactly,
work.
So they extend that conditionality to people in part-time working with younger children. And so that is primarily going to affect women. And I think there's a bigger problem here that when we look at the actual Universal Credit system, the generosity of the support that it gives to working people has been reduced quite significantly. And that puts actually not just the kind of practical support they're getting, but the kind of financial return for people to move into work and increase their hours is now reduced from the original scheme, and that brings a greater risk that it places greater emphasis on that kind of practical support and the conditions to help to push people up to work more hours. And I think that's a real risk that you could start to get people not find themselves significantly better off, but being forced to work more hours.
Got you. Thank you. David Finch from the Resolution Foundation, thank you very much. And Matthew Oakley from WPI Economics, which looks at how governments can improve policy. Thank you very much.